One of the things we've been saying very clearly in these interviews is that there is at least two parts to each of us, very distinct parts that we're calling our temperaments. And so when you've got a set of emotions or two sets of emotions, both contradicting each other, you can really wonder what on earth is going on inside you. You can feel almost like a split personality, or as if you're being very indecisive at times, because there are just two completely seemingly irreconcilable sets of emotions happening at the same time. So to make sense of all this can bring an enormous amount of peace and of deep self-acceptance.
Do you want to know yourself, or to know the person you're in relationship with in a deeper way? Do you want to understand why you are thinking and feeling certain things and reacting in certain ways, and why there's conflict inside of yourself or inside of your relationships? Well, in this episode, I have a conversation with John Sparks. It's actually a compilation of conversations that I've had with John Sparks that I've cut up and put together for you to help you and introduce you to the theory of temperaments. William Shakespeare wrote, "This above all, to thine self be true." How can you be true to yourself if you don't know yourself? Socrates said, "Know thyself." So do we take the time and energy to really know ourselves, the characteristics and temperaments that we have, and also of the person we're in relationship with? The Four Temperament theory is a proto-psychological theory which suggests that there are four fundamental personality types: the sanguine, the choleric, the melancholic, and the phlegmatic. There's also a possibility of having a mixture of the different temperaments, so you can definitely have more than one, you can have two, possibly you can have all three. One will possibly be predominant though. So for me, I have a predominant melancholic temperament, and this has helped me to know the characteristics and ins and outs of this temperament type, because I'm very sensitive, very creative, but those strengths can become weaknesses. So the sensitivity that I have can become and turn into subjectivity. So I'm turning everything back on myself. But because I know this about myself, I can learn to be more objective. Now I have the sanguine temperament, which is my extrovert side, and it's got a whole list of wonderful qualities. But these qualities mixed with the melancholic, they can sometimes be two very opposite, opposing things. So this can create conflict inside. But the point of knowing temperaments and your temperament and the mixture of your temperament is to help those two parts of you work together, integrated and in unison. It helps us understand ourselves deeper when we know our temperament, why we feel certain things, and also what to do about it. Now that we can know about ourselves, we can play to our strengths and check them when they are tipping over into their negative trait. So today's episodes, you will hear parts of different conversations I've had with John Sparks, and he has had over 50 years of counseling people using the temperament understanding and the theory of it. It's also just to remember, this is not about putting yourself in a box or labeling your loved ones, but it is about understanding and using a pattern of how to understand yourself and the people around you. You can watch this episode on YouTube. I've done something quite different in this visual on YouTube. I've created a bit of a story with the audio. You can also leave a review. That would be very helpful. You can check me out on Instagram at Grow Your Dreams Podcast. And you can also check out the show notes. I'll leave some helpful links in there for you. Enjoy this episode. Oh, and P.S., if you go over to YouTube, you can see my new studio space, which I'm very excited about because I will be having interviews with people right here. So I'll be doing some live stuff, which is very exciting indeed. Enjoy. John, for somebody who's never heard of temperaments, can you explain just lay a bit of a foundational work on what a temperament is, and yeah, how does it affect us, and how
Okay.
does it affect knowing our temperament, and if we don't know it, how does it affect our lives and our relationships?
Okay. So there's a lot in those questions, but I'll try.
Okay.
um, what are temperaments? They're a collection of ingredients. So think of it like this. I always remember my granddaughter, my eldest granddaughter, Jessie, having floor puzzles. And they were these big, quite chunky puzzles, but they're really big pictures that you built up on the floor. I can remember one of a fire engine and a number of others. So it's rather like this, that each individual piece of that floor puzzle, when all joined with the right pieces, made obviously a complete picture. But there were 3 other puzzles in that set. And a lot of those pieces looked very similar, but they obviously wouldn't fit with the wrong picture. They wouldn't slot in. So you ended up with 4 different pictures that you obviously had to work out all these pieces going together. And I think all of us have a collection of ingredients, a bit like the collection of jigsaw puzzle pieces, that when they're put together make a very distinctive picture. And for example, we talk about the melancholic temperament, and we use words like they're sensitive, and we ask the question, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer is it can be both. It depends what you do with it. They can be very loyal. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, obviously that can be a lovely quality. Equally, if we misunderstand loyalty, we can be used and abused. And so each of those ingredients has the ability to be a positive or a negative. But if we understand those ingredients and what the picture looks like when we join all the separate pieces together, if we understand which temperament we have, we will have already come a long way in understanding what makes us tick. I may not have answered all your questions there, so do come
No,
back
no,
on any
that's fine.
questions if you want.
I think I probably threw way too many at once at you, but that's a really good picture, yeah, of what you've created there for us with your granddaughter and the puzzle. So where does it go wrong when we either don't understand our temperament or if we've misunderstood ourselves?
Okay, that's a very good question again. Each of us has at least an introvert. And by introvert, I mean that part of us that is often deeply feeling, can be creative, will be reflective, and where a lot of the emotions that we experience go on. And there are 2 introvert temperaments. I know the names seem a bit old-fashioned, but these have been in the English language now for many years. One is the phlegmatic, very tender, very aware, but tends to self-protect. The other is the melancholic, sensitive, can use that sensitivity to very good positive effect when connected with others, or they can become very subjective when they turn that against themselves. Now, most people have got an extrovert sitting on top of their introvert. Most of us have at least 2 temperaments. And the extrovert, that's the sanguine or the choleric, tend to be the part that we use to connect initially with people and with life as a whole. And the danger is that it's easier to live as an extrovert. It's easier to fit in with people as an extrovert. And depending on, for example, the kind of family that we were brought up in, and by that I mean whether the parents were living in their introvert or whether they were just very outgoing people, not stopping to look at what they really felt, and maybe that's what they experienced in their family home. When you, as a child in that situation, are aware of feelings and a depth of sensitivity or tenderness that you don't know what to do with, that can cause real difficulty. And you can end up feeling very odd. You can end up getting laughed at, bullied. And in the end, it would be very easy to say, do you know, that part of me, that introvert part, is just a pain. It's stopping me from experiencing life. Now, that's not true, but because that part of us hasn't been given the space and the security that it needs in order to express what it's feeling, to not be laughed at, to be made to feel safe, to not have to be macho or whatever. If that's not given that space, then it becomes a bit of a ball and chain. And we see it like that, and we dislike that side of us. I know of people who have made, perhaps even in their early teens or younger, that conscious choice to live in their extrovert because that's what gets them the friends. That's what stops them being laughed at. And then as adults, that creates all sorts of difficulties when they want to begin to build a meaningful relationship, heart-to-heart relationship with somebody. Then they find that they're struggling to discover the resources within themselves to do so. They're there, but they don't know how to draw on them because they weren't taught to look at them, to express them, to process them in childhood.
You know, how essential is it for someone to actually recognize and understand their introvert temperament? We will move on to the extroverts, but
Sure.
just staying here with the introverts.
Yes. Yeah.
How damaging can it be to not actually be living in your temperament, your introvert temperament?
Yes. It's very damaging on all sorts of fronts. So just imagine a child. Let's try and make this practical. Let's say a melancholic child. Let's go with one of the extroverts, well, it could be either, but let's say one that we'll come to in a moment, the sanguine. Sanguine child is very happy, outgoing child. I'm thinking of a man who I worked with who had the sanguine, very happy, outgoing temperament, but also had the melancholic temperament. And he said of his boyhood, brought up on a farm, and he said they all thought I was a very happy little boy. But he said what they didn't know about were the times when I would be out in the fields by the farm gate just sobbing my heart out. Now, this man went on and had major emotional struggles and so on and so forth. So it's almost like two people going through life together, thinking of, in his case, the sanguine and then the melancholic. Think of them as two small boys embarking on life together. Well, how does that little boy learn to handle life? He does so by using his sanguine, because there's nobody there to make his melancholic feel secure, to know that he's understood and safe. So it's almost like the bigger lad, if we can put it like that, the extrovert, will step in when the going gets tough and says, leave this to me, I'll handle it. But the trouble is the melancholic's been diminished all the time. And instead of it developing and becoming streetwise and strong and all the rest, kind of gets smaller and smaller. I've got a section on one of the courses in which I talk about the underdeveloped introvert. So, you know, when you come to adult relationships, you're in trouble because you really want to be able to give your heart to somebody. And I know we're using the expression introvert somewhat synonymously with heart here, but you're not going to give away to somebody a part of you that you feel is pretty pathetic, and that you actually want to hide away. So you can just see on that front. And the other thing that happens is it's the attitude of the extrovert towards the introvert that actually decides how you really feel about yourself. So a lot of people go through life with a pretty poor view of themselves. Now, they may sometimes come across as very confident and all the rest of it. And I'm not saying that there aren't some confident people out there, but a lot of them, that confidence will be a continual attempt to compensate for what they really feel about themselves. And over time, that can be exhausting.
Why is it important to gain an understanding of your temperament? And what difference does it make to somebody's life if they put the effort in to actually know yourself at this level?
Well, I think most of us at some point or other, unless you've been one of those very fortunate people that's been spared this, most of us will have probably wondered what on earth is wrong with us. All sorts of strange feelings going on inside, and sometimes very contradictory feelings. And one of the things we've been saying very clearly in these interviews is that there is at least two parts to each of us, very distinct parts that we're calling our temperaments. And so when you've got a set of emotions or two sets of emotions, both contradicting each other, you can really wonder what on earth is going on inside you. You can feel almost like a split personality, or as if you're being very indecisive at times, because there are just two completely seemingly irreconcilable sets of emotions happening at the same time. So to make sense of all this can bring an enormous amount of peace and of deep self-acceptance.
I think what all this kind of content and information and understanding has provided me is just a deeper awareness of how complex and wonderful we actually are,
Yes.
with all our thoughts and feelings, and, how most of us do have those two temperaments and they can have opposing characteristics.
Yes.
So, is there a ratio? Well, I know there is, but maybe you could go into this and how it affects us. But the ratio of how big is your melancholic compared to the sanguine? How big is your extrovert compared to your introvert? Because I know when I did the course with you, it came out that I was 70% melancholic, and that just came out through a series of the questionnaires and conversation.
Yes.
70% melancholic, and then the smaller part of me was sanguine.
Yes.
And when that information was in front of me, it just made so much sense that for me, I just understood myself with so much more light and understanding, and
Yes.
it helped me. Yeah, so just look back at my life and realize, oh, that's why I was always exhausted after school, completely drained, because I was always pushing myself into the class clown sanguine.
Yes.
Being loud constantly.
Yes.
And I was never, going into my quiet kind of melancholic. But I do remember when I was in art class, it was always my best class and always got my best marks, because that's when I did allow myself to be, quiet and creative.
Yes.
But just, so going back to the question of how do you kind of know, or what
in a way, you've answered the question yourself, and very well. It's exactly as you've said. It's hard work living in the part of you that perhaps doesn't naturally dominate, because, and that draws out another important principle here. If we don't understand our introvert and are not in the process of learning how to handle it, we will automatically try and escape into the extrovert. And not only are we neglecting all the qualities in the introvert, but we're putting a double load onto the extrovert. And as you rightly say, if perhaps you're only 30% sanguine, that means that that part of you is carrying 100% responsibility for the whole of who you are. So that's why you would be exhausted. But really, the understanding that you've just shown really does set you free, because I know you well enough to know that you are predominantly a creative person. In other words, your melancholic comes through loud and clear. So you are much more living in the balance of who you are that is consistent with the fact you're 70% melancholic and 30% sanguine.
Is there a way for people to kind of determine, which temperament they have is bigger, or is it always the introvert which has more weight?
No, it's not always. It could have been the other way around. You could have been 70% sanguine and 30% melancholic. We do a what we call a temperament checklist that just asks a series of questions relating to the temperament trait. So if anybody was interested in just doing that, and then you ask somebody else to fill in a column for you, that's quite interesting. Do just write into the website and ask for that, and we'll gladly do that for you. But that aside, I think the more you familiarise yourself with the various traits, it is a case of kind of getting to know yourself, and that doesn't happen overnight. But if you look at the traits, you'll find some of them there on the website and in one of our little booklets that we've mentioned, Understanding Temperaments, or on Amazon, Understanding Yourself. If you look at that, you'll begin to recognize those traits within yourself, and you begin to think, okay, so that's my melancholic, and that's all right. Cultivate it, celebrate it. And equally, those lovely qualities of the sanguine, don't stifle them. Be both, do both. Just gives you an incredible range of qualities at your fingertips.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Grow Your Dreams podcast. You can support this beautiful podcast by heading over to shaylinfair.com, and you can hit the donate button. That money and support will be used for the running costs of all the platforms that I use and upgrade of equipment. I'm looking to get another mic for future in-house interviews. Also, if you follow me on Instagram, you will see that I was recording an interview with Hannah Overton, who was put in prison for life for being wrongfully accused of murdering her foster son. So it's a very dramatic but powerful story that I really wanted to share with you. In recording it, though, her internet was not great at her house, so we've kind of lost the ability to download the full interview, video and audio. So we are going to try get that done again for you guys in the next couple of months. So stay tuned for that, because that is powerful. And I just really wish I could have got that file for you guys to share it with you. But anyway, we will do it again. And so be blessed and stay tuned.